"You belong to me now," the Apache woman said to the wounded cowboy. And she said it the way you would tell a horse to hold still, calm and certain, as she counted silver into a fat man's open hand. The cowboy could barely hear her. His head was split and roaring, his hands were bound behind him with rawhide, and one eye had swollen shut from the beating that put him on the auction block in the first place. But he heard that one sentence, "You belong to me now." And the worst part, the part that burned hotter than the wound, was that in that moment, in that place, it was simply true. His name was Wade Coleman. 4 days before, Wade Coleman had been a free man, with a saddle and a future. Now he stood in the dust of a lawless border settlement, sold to a stranger for a sack of silver, and the stranger was a woman of the Apache, with a scar through one eyebrow and eyes that gave nothing away. The fat man who had owned Wade Coleman, a slaver named Dolph Reese, bit one of the silver coins to test it, grunted, and waved a hand. "He's yours," Dolph Reese said. "Won't last the week, that one. Stubborn. But that's your problem now, ain't it?" The Apache woman did not answer Dolph Reese. She did not waste words on men like Dolph Reese. She took the lead rope tied to Wade Coleman's bound hands, and she turned, and she walked, and Wade Coleman had no choice but to stumble after her into the desert, a bought man following a woman whose name he did not even know. The settlement watched them go. There were maybe a dozen men loafing in the shade of that place, traders and gun hands and men with no honest business, and not one of them thought twice about what they had just seen. A man sold, a woman leading him off on a rope. In that country, in that year, it was as ordinary as the sale of a mule. There is no lesson about cruelty, quite like being on the wrong end of it. Hold on to that picture. A bound man, a sack of silver, and a woman leading him off into the brush. Because by the time this story is done, that same man will be a free man, who could ride away in any direction he chooses, and he will choose to stay. How a bought man becomes a man who stays. That is the whole story. Let us walk it. To understand the silver, you have to understand how Wade Coleman ended up on an auction block in the first place, because free men do not get sold by accident. Wade Coleman had been driving cattle north with a small outfit, a hard, honest job, and somewhere south of the line, the outfit rode into an ambush. Comancheros, border raiders who dealt in stolen cattle and stolen people both. They killed 2 of Wade Coleman's companions outright. They took Wade Coleman alive, because a strong young man alive is worth money to the right buyer, and they sold him down the chain until he came to the slaver named Dolph Reese, who ran human beings across that lawless border country, like the cattle Wade Coleman used to drive. Reese beat the fight out of his stock before he sold it. He beat Wade Coleman for 3 days. By the 4th day, when they stood Wade Coleman up on the block, he was wounded, half blind, and so far past hope that he had stopped praying, which for a praying man is a long way down. Stand in Wade Coleman's boots for a moment. 4 days earlier, Wade Coleman had been a man with plans. A wage coming at the end of the drive, money saved toward a small place of his own. Then, in the space of one ambush at dawn, all of it was gone, and Wade Coleman was an object with a price on it, standing in the sun, while strangers looked at his teeth and his shoulders and decided what he was worth. There is a thing that breaks in a man when that happens. Not the body. The body heals. It is the belief that he is a person, that his wanting and his choosing count for something. Dolph Reese broke that in Wade Coleman on purpose, with 3 days of fists, because broken stock is quiet stock. By the morning of the sale, Wade Coleman had stopped believing he was a person at all. He was just waiting to die and be done. That was the man the Apache woman bought, not a hero. A beaten, bound, hopeless man, with a roaring head and one eye swollen shut, worth less than the silver she paid. By every measure the men in that settlement understood. But the Apache woman had not come to that settlement for the measures the men understood. She had come for a reason of her own. and Wade Coleman would not learn that reason for a long time. For now, all Wade Coleman knew was that a stranger owned him, and that he would die in the desert before he let himself be owned for long. He told himself that on the walk out of the settlement. Wait for the chance. Run the first night. He did not know yet what kind of woman he had been sold to. He was about to start finding out. The Apache woman's name was Nahlin, though Wade Coleman did not learn it for 2 days, because Nahlin did not speak to explain herself to anyone. Nahlin led Wade Coleman a half-day's walk into broken country, to a small camp tucked in a canyon where a thread of water ran, a single brush shelter, and a fire ring, and 2 horses. There was no band. There were no other people. Wade Coleman, looking around with his one good eye, understood with a sick drop in his stomach that this woman lived alone out here, which meant whatever she wanted him for, there was no one to see it, and no one to stop it. The first thing Nahlin did when they reached the camp was cut the rawhide off Wade Coleman's wrists. That stopped him. A man who owns you does not free your hands the first hour. Wade Coleman stood there, rubbing the blood back into his wrists, watching Nahlin, waiting for the catch. There did not seem to be a catch. Nahlin pointed to a flat rock by the fire, the way you would point a guest to a chair, and then she went to the fire and started grinding something in a stone bowl, and she did not look at Wade Coleman again for a long time. That night, Wade Coleman did not run. He had told himself he would run the first night, but his head was roaring, and his legs were water, and the canyon was a maze he did not know in the dark, and a man who runs into a desert he does not know, wounded, at night, is a man who chooses a slower death. So Wade Coleman lay by the fire and watched Nahlin through his one good eye, and waited, and Nahlin let him watch, and neither one of them said a word. The silence went on for 2 days. Nahlin cleaned and packed the wound on his head with a poultice from the stone bowl, and her hands were quick and sure, and not unkind, and still she did not speak. She fed him from the same pot she ate from. She gave him a blanket, and every time Wade Coleman braced for the catch, the cruelty, the reason a woman buys a man, it did not come. On the second night, Wade Coleman could not stand the silence anymore, and he broke it himself. "Why did you buy me?" Wade Coleman asked. "What do you want?" Nahlin looked at him across the fire for a long moment. Then Nahlin said the second full sentence she had ever said to him. "I did not buy a man," Nahlin said. "I bought you back from men who should not own anyone. What you do now is yours to decide, but you will not decide it tonight, half dead. Sleep. We will talk when your head is whole." The thing that changed Wade Coleman was not one big moment. It was 100 small ones, and the first was a cup of broth. On the third morning, Wade Coleman woke too weak to sit up, the wound on his head gone hot and angry, the way wounds do before they turn deadly. Nahlin knelt over him with a horn cup of broth and her hand behind his head, and she fed it to him, a slow sip at a time, the way you feed a child or a dying man, and she stayed with him through the whole hot, shaking day, while the fever burned and broke. A man remembers who sat with him in the fever. Wade Coleman had been beaten by men for 3 days, and sold like a steer, and then a stranger he had been taught to fear sat by him through a fever, with a cup of broth and a steady hand, asking nothing. The arithmetic of that did not work in Wade Coleman's head. It was supposed to be the other way around. His own people, the people who looked like him, had ambushed his outfit, and beaten him, and sold him. And this woman, Nahlin, whose people his people called enemy, had spent good silver to take him out of that, and then sat by his fever. The world he thought he understood turned over. By the second day, the fear Wade Coleman had carried since the auction block had nowhere left to stand. You cannot keep fearing the hand that is keeping you alive. The fear simply runs out, like water in the dry season, and something has to take its place. When the fever broke, Wade Coleman was clear-headed for the first time in a week, and he started, finally, to see Nahlin instead of just fearing her. He saw that Nahlin lived alone because something had taken everyone else. He saw it in the 2 graves at the canyon mouth, marked with stones, that he had not understood at first. He saw that Nahlin was younger than the scar, and the silence made her seem. And he saw, watching her work, that this woman was carrying a grief as heavy as the one he carried for his murdered companions, and was carrying it alone, the way he had carried his. "Those graves," Wade Coleman said one evening, "careful, because some doors you knock on softly." "Who were they, Nahlin?" Nahlin was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Then Nahlin told him, and when she told him, Wade Coleman finally understood why an Apache woman had walked into a slaver's settlement and spent silver on a beaten stranger. "My husband and my brother," Nahlin said, looking at the 2 stone-marked graves. "Comancheros took them in a raid 2 winters ago. Not killed. Taken. Sold. The way they sold you. Down the chain. Into the same country you came out of. I went to find them. I was too late for both. By the time I followed the trail to where they had been sold, my husband was dead of the work, and my brother was dead of a fever like yours, alone, with no one to sit beside him." Nahlin stopped. Wade Coleman did not fill the silence. "Some silences you leave alone. So now I go back," Nahlin went on. "Every season, when I have silver enough, I go to the places where they sell people. And when I see a man on the block who is dying the way my brother died, alone, with no one, I buy him, and I take him out of there, and I do not let him die alone. That is all. That is the whole reason, Cowboy. You were on the block, dying alone. I have seen that face before. I could not save my brother, so I save who I can." Wade Coleman sat with that a long while. It rearranged something in him. He had spent the early days waiting for the catch, the cruelty, the reason a woman buys a man. The reason was grief. The reason was a woman who could not save her own, and had decided to save strangers instead, because the alternative was to let the grief eat her down to nothing in that empty canyon. He had locked his own grief away to survive. The 2 men of his outfit, the raiders had killed on the trail. Now, by Nahlin's fire, he let the door on it crack open a little, because for the first time he was sitting with someone who understood exactly what was behind it. He did not weep, but his throat closed, and Nahlin saw it, and said nothing, and her saying nothing was the kindest thing she could have done. "You said I belong to you," Wade Coleman said quietly, "back at the settlement. You said it like a fact. I said it so the slaver would let me lead you out without trouble," Nahlin said. "You belong to no one, Wade Coleman. Not him. Not me. I told you the first night. What you do now is yours." It was the first time Nahlin had said his name. Wade Coleman. She had remembered it from the block, from the slaver's careless talk, and she had held it. A man who has been called stock and stubborn, and that one for a week, does not forget the first person who says his actual name, like it means something. Wade Coleman did not forget it. He never did. Wade Coleman could have left then. His wrists were free. His head was healing, and Nahlin had told him plainly the road was his. But the desert beyond the canyon was 100 dangerous miles in every direction, and Wade Coleman was still weak, and there was something else, something he was slow to admit. He did not want to leave yet, so Wade Coleman stayed, and he started to earn his place instead of waiting to flee it. He was a cattleman, good with animals and good with his hands, and Nahlin's small camp had work in it that 2 people could do better than one. Wade Coleman mended the brush shelter against the coming weather. He hunted, and he was a fine shot, and meat came easier to the camp than it had in a long time. He found the canyon's hidden water in the dry stretch, and dug it wider so it ran clean. And Nahlin, who had lived 2 years inside her grief and her silence, slowly came back out into the daylight. She laughed once, at something Wade Coleman said wrong in his clumsy Apache, and the sound surprised them both, and Nahlin put her hand over her mouth, like she had dropped something precious. Wade Coleman decided right then he would spend a good part of the rest of his life trying to make that sound happen again. There was one evening in those weeks that Wade Coleman kept for the rest of his life. The dry stretch had broken at last, and a soft rain came down on the canyon at dusk, the first real rain in a month. Nahlin stood out in it, with her face turned up, not hiding from the weather the way Wade Coleman's people did, but standing in it like the rain was an old friend come back. Wade Coleman watched her from the shelter, then walked out and stood in the rain beside her. Neither one said anything. The horses steamed in the wet, and Wade Coleman thought, standing there soaked to the skin next to a woman who had bought him for silver weeks before, that he had not felt this much like a whole human being since long before the raiders ever found his outfit. They were two people who had each lost everything to the same lawless border country. Wade Coleman had lost his companions and his freedom to the raiders. Nahlin had lost her husband and her brother to the same chain of men. They had come at the wound from opposite sides, but it was the same wound, and there is a particular closeness between two people who carry the same wound. It is not pity, it is recognition. Wade Coleman looked at Nahlin and saw someone who understood exactly what had been done to him, because it had been done to her too. By the end of those weeks, the bargain that started in the dust of the settlement, the silver and the rope and the cold sentence, had quietly turned into something else, not a master and a bought man. Two people building a small life in a canyon, each one choosing the other a little more every day. Trouble does not forget an address, and the lawless border country had not finished with Wade Coleman or Nahlin. Dolph Reese, the slaver who had sold Wade Coleman, was a careful man about his property, and a man who deals in people keeps track of where they go. Reese had taken note of the Apache woman who came every season with silver and bought his dying stock, and Reese had begun to wonder where she kept them and whether a woman alone with a canyon and horses and silver might be worth more to him than the few coins she spent. So Dolph Reese followed Nahlin's trail back, in no hurry, with 3 of his men, and one cold morning, the 4 of them rode into the mouth of the canyon past the 2 stone-marked graves. Wade Coleman saw them first. He knew Dolph Reese's fat shape on a horse before he could see the face, and his whole body went cold, because he knew exactly what Reese was, and exactly what 4 armed men riding into a hidden camp meant. "Get behind the rocks," Wade Coleman told Nahlin. "Lo, there is a rifle in the shelter. Get it and stay back." But Nahlin did not get behind the rocks. Nahlin had spent 2 years hunting the men who dealt in people, and the chief of them had just ridden up to her fire, and Nahlin was not a woman who hid from that. Nahlin picked up the rifle, and she stood in the open beside Wade Coleman, and the 2 of them faced the 4 riders together. "Well now," Dolph Reese called out, "easy," looking from Nahlin to Wade Coleman and back. "Look at this. The squaw kept the stubborn one alive after all, and built herself a nice little hide hole too. Here's how this goes. We take the woman, we take the horses, we take the silver, and we take you, Cowboy, back to the block, since you're walking and worth coin again. Or you make it hard, and we take it all anyway, and bury you by them rocks. Your choice." Wade Coleman had heard a sentence like that before, in the settlement, the day he was sold, a fat man laying out a future for him as if Wade Coleman's own will did not enter into it. The last time, Wade Coleman had been bound and beaten and could do nothing. This time, Wade Coleman's hands were free, and there was a rifle in them, and beside him stood a woman who had spent silver and grief to make him a man again, instead of stock. Wade Coleman was done being told who he belonged to. "Reese," Wade Coleman said, and his voice did not shake. "You're going to turn those horses around and ride out of this canyon, and you're going to do it now. You sold me once. You will not do it twice. There is no price on me, because I am not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Test that, and you will not ride out of here at all." Dolph Reese laughed, Because bullies laugh right up until the second they stop. 4 guns, Cowboy, Reese said, against a stubborn steer and a squaw. 3 of your men do not know this canyon, Nahlin said, and her voice was as flat and certain as the day she counted the silver. I do. I know every rock above your head, slaver. I have stood here 2 years, waiting for a man like you to be foolish enough to ride in. Look up, if you do not believe me. Then count your guns again. Reese looked up, despite himself. And whether there was truly anyone on the canyon rim, or whether Nahlin had simply learned, in 2 hard years, exactly how to put the fear of an ambush into a coward's mind, the bluff did its work. Reese's 3 men were hired guns, not loyal ones. And hired guns do not die in a canyon for a fat man's greed when the odds turn uncertain. Wade Coleman saw the doubt move through them. He had driven enough nervous cattle to know when a herd is about to break. Wade Coleman had learned something on the cattle trail that served him now. Frightened, uncertain men will follow the first one who moves, in whatever direction he moves. So Wade Coleman took 1 slow step forward, toward the riders, the way you walk into a nervous herd to turn it. That 1 calm step told 4 armed men that this cowboy was not afraid to die here, and it made every one of them suddenly very interested in not dying here either. It broke. One of Reese's men muttered something and backed his horse, then another, and Dolph Reese, suddenly a fat man alone at the front of men who would not follow him into uncertain ground, did the math that cowards do fast, and he turned his horse with a curse. This ain't finished, Reese spat. It is, Wade Coleman said. You only haven't noticed yet. Wade Coleman did not lower his rifle until the last of them was small against the canyon mouth and gone. Then his arms began to shake, and he let them, because the shaking comes after, never during. Beside him, Nahlin lowered her own rifle, and Wade Coleman saw that her hands were steady, perfectly steady, and he understood that she had meant every word of the bluff, that if it had come to blood, she would have fought 4 men without flinching, because she had nothing left to lose that she had not already lost. That was the moment Wade Coleman knew, all the way down, what kind of woman had bought him. Not a woman who needed saving, a woman who had been doing the saving, alone, for 2 long years, and who had just stood her ground at her own fire, against the very trade that took her family, and won. The 4 riders went back out of the canyon the way they had come, past the 2 stone graves, and they did not return that day. That night, by the fire, Nahlin did a thing Wade Coleman did not expect, and it was the hardest, truest thing she ever did. Nahlin took the small sack of silver she had left, and she set it down in front of Wade Coleman. Beside it, she set a knife, a water skin, and a hand-drawn map of the country north, scratched on hide, the safe water marked. Reese knows this canyon now, Nahlin said. He will brood, and his kind always comes back bigger. It is not safe here for you anymore. North of here, 4 days, there is a settlement with law, real law, where a man like you can be free and whole. Take the silver, take the horse, take the map. Go, Wade Coleman. You are free. You were always free. Now I am giving you the means to use it. Wade Coleman looked at the silver and the knife and the map. He understood what Nahlin was doing. She was setting him loose on purpose, at cost to herself, giving away her silver and one of her horses and her safety, because she had spent 2 years learning that you do not let the people you care about die in a place that has become a trap. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever offered Wade Coleman. And it was a test, though Nahlin did not mean it as one. Every door Nahlin opened was a true door. She would have let him walk through it. Wade Coleman pushed the silver back across the dirt toward her. You bought me out of that settlement, Wade Coleman said, slow, picking each word, because it was the most important thing he had ever said. You sat by my fever. You said my name when men had been calling me stock for a week. You taught me I was not for sale. So I am going to use what you taught me, Nahlin. And here is what a free man does with himself. He chooses, and I choose to stay. Nahlin started to speak. Wade Coleman did not let her. Not here in this canyon, where Reese can find us. You are right about that. We will go north together, to the settlement with Law. I will work, and I am a good worker. You have seen it. And you will not buy any more dying men out of slavers' hands, Nahlin, because you will not need to. You bought them because you could not save your own, and could not bear to do nothing. I am telling you, you do not have to bear it alone anymore. Whatever you carry, I will carry the other side of it. That is what staying means. That is what I choose. The fire popped in the long quiet. Across it, the woman named Nahlin, who had buried a husband and a brother and a whole life, and had walked into slavers' settlements alone for 2 years, buying back strangers because she could not save her own, looked at the cowboy named Wade Coleman, and something in her face that had been clenched shut for a long time finally opened. You belong to no one, Nahlin said, and her voice was not flat now. I told you that the first night. I know, Wade Coleman said. That is exactly why I get to give myself to you. A bought man can't do that. Only a free one can. They left the canyon at dawn, the 2 of them, with the 2 horses and the small silver, and the map scratched on hide. They stopped at the canyon mouth, and Nahlin knelt a moment at the 2 stone-marked graves, her husband and her brother, and she said something low to them in her own tongue that Wade Coleman did not ask her to translate, because some words belong to the one who says them. Then Nahlin stood, and she did not look back again, because she had finally said goodbye, and a goodbye said is a weight set down. They reached the settlement with the real Law in 4 days, just as the map promised. Wade Coleman found work the first week, breaking and tending horses, because a good hand always finds work. They built a life there, small and hard, and theirs, in a rough town that did not always make room for a white cowboy and an Apache woman, but made enough, in the end, because Wade Coleman was stubborn about it, and Nahlin had faced down worse than a town's cold looks. It was not all hardship. Wade Coleman's skill with horses made him needed, and a needed man earns a grudging respect that softens a town over time. People who had crossed the street to avoid Nahlin in the first year were bringing their lame horses to her husband by the 3rd. Nahlin, for her part, became the woman other women came to quietly when a child took a fever and the doctor was 40 miles off, because a frightened mother does not care which border her help comes from. 1 mended horse and 1 broken fever at a time, the cowboy and the Apache woman stopped being a scandal and became simply a married couple, which is all they had ever wanted to be. Dolph Reese, the slaver, never did come back. Word drifted up the next year that Reese had been hung 2 counties south for the trade he ran, when the law that country had lacked for so long finally arrived. Nahlin heard it and said nothing for a long while, and then she said only, "Good," and went back to her work, because some debts are not yours to collect, and the relief of that is its own kind of mercy. Wade Coleman lived a long life with Nahlin, and when he was old, and people who did not know better asked how a cattleman from Texas came to spend his years with an Apache woman, Wade Coleman always told it the same way, and he always started in the same place, with the worst moment of his life, in the dust of a lawless settlement. "She bought me for a sack of silver," Wade Coleman would say, and his old eyes would go bright. "Told me I belonged to her, and then she spent every day after proving I belonged to nobody, until I was free enough to choose her back. You want to know what love is? It is somebody buying you out of the worst place you ever stood, and then handing you the means to walk away, and you stay anyway. That is the whole of it. That is Nahlin. It started as a bargain, a cold transaction in the dust, a man sold like a steer. It ended as the one bond in Wade Coleman's life that he chose, with his whole free heart. Dignity taken, and then dignity returned. one cup of broth and one spoken name at a time, until the bought man was a free man, and the free man stayed. If Nahlin and Wade Coleman pulled you all the way through to here, then you understand what this channel is for. There is another story waiting right now, and another soul out on the frontier worth your time. Stay close. We are just getting started.